on 5E, this one is an item that's been on the table for a long time. We considered this Taser report early last year, but there was an item pending on it, which we saw a few months later, but I think we're finally ready to consider the full thing. So Tony, you want to lead us through this one?
Sure. So the reports and the video have all been on the CPRB portal through the city for some time now. As Ricardo had said, this was initially considered. However, the only video that was available at the time was the video from the actual Taser device itself. It was like a 10 to 15 second video with audio, but it didn't provide a lot of evidence or information as to the surrounding circumstances as to why it was deployed. The reports and the video, I think, are the video from the one squad dash cam are pretty much the most helpful, I think, as far as determining the use of the Taser in this incident. So, you know, I don't know if we have someone from the police department that is going to provide comments on this first. You know, if we just want to do a you know, discussion of what occurred or what we have in the file, and then
I would like to say something.
Go ahead, Carol.
So we don't have a representative of the police here tonight, but I before you go much further on this topic, I do want to take a moment to refer everybody back to the ordinance, because it's relevant to this discussion. It's relevant to the vote you took in April. And so let's see how successfully I will share my screen here. I've
got the ordinance.
Oh, God bless you.
So
okay,
just pull
great.
Because...
Go to, if you would.
Gotta find my share button.
If you could go to 19-43.
Okay. Right now, the faces are blocking my access to share screen.
Okay.
There it is.
Thank you. Thank you so much. Okay, 19-43 is entitled Limitations on CPRB's Review of Taser Displays. So what this says is the CPRB shall review the police department's Taser displays in the manner provided in this division 4, and shall have the authority to make recommendations concerning amendments to the police department policies and practices concerning Taser displays. Now, this is the very relevant part. The CPRB shall have no authority under this division 4 to review the conduct of any individual police officer or any individual Taser display, or recommend any disciplinary action regarding an individual police officer. So the vote that you took on April 28th of this year was a vote that the motion was Taser usage was not appropriate per policy 304. 304.5.1 or -5.1. It was a reference to a specific police policy, which is explicitly not within your authority to do. So if your intent this evening is to revisit such a vote, I wanted you to be clear, especially since we have new members, that that is not within your authority. If, however, you wanted to discuss that case and whether or not you wanted to make any recommendations about the policy itself, that would be appropriate. However, the vote that you took in April was outside of your authority. And I wanted everybody to understand that before you proceed.
I'm confused as to what 43 says, because if we're supposed to make advisements or if we're supposed to give opinions as to the departmental policy, but in the abstract and not be able to comment on the uses of the taser in individual cases, that section doesn't seem to make any sense to me.
Well, it's part of this. Perhaps you could benefit from a little bit of history, and I'm not going to pretend to be the best versed in all the history, but I have. If Scotty were here, he would probably have the most. But perhaps Ricardo has a recollection of some of this. But when there was a desire to have tasers in Urbana, there was a lot of, I think, concern about how they would be used and whether the policy was going to be adequate to prevent any kind of, what do I want to say, undesirable uses of the taser. And so and this is also how the side letter got into the FOP contract, which was there was a desire to have some kind of oversight over the taser, the taser program. And so this is what was crafted, and what was crafted is, okay, we'll take feedback from the CPRB as it relates to the policy itself, but they explicitly said, and you're not an investigatory body, so as you try to probe an issue about whether or not an individual officer complied with the policy, you're putting yourself in an investigative posture, which is not what was intended for the CPRB. So I think that's how you get to this point. And whether you agree with 1943 or not, it's pretty explicit about where your authorities are.
So let me add, because it was Scotty, Rich Searles, who's now deputy chief, and then myself, that we sat through and tried to figure out how to work out a fair usage policy, and then how it would come back to CPRB. There are some parts, 43 is the start of that. Then there's an investigation I was looking forward to, since I'm still sharing, as to how those displays would show up. You have to remember that back then there were no cameras, and the tasers provided a camera along with the audio. And aside from squad cars, in these situations, that was the camera. So one of the early decisions was, anytime a taser gets unholstered, the camera is on. And that's how we end up with a lot of, and the second one was, the taser display would not, they would not point the taser to threaten. They would point it when they were ready to pull the trigger, because it was a need for the taser. So many times in our earlier reviews, all we saw was the floor while the audio was being captured. But that's important in that, as you see, not in 45, but when you go to 46, the review procedure, 1946 gives quite a bit of detail as to what was in there and how to go about seeing it. Shall consider the information contained. So I'm now reading in it, 1946A. will commence this review of the Taser display incident report and other information as provided by the department. Shall consider the information contained and other information in the aggregate on completion of the review. So we watch it, was the intention. The CPRB may recommend amendments concerning the police department's policies and practices concerning the Taser displays and provide reasons there. And the reasons that therefore it's extra there. But and it was always intended, well, in fact, we name it somewhere that we would do them in batches so that we could concentrate on policies. That is, each individual display had its own context that may or may not fit. But it is true, Tony, that when you start watching the incidents, the usage, that's what you rely on to make general recommendations. They're not in the abstract, they are right in front of us because we just saw a display happen. It is also true that while we weren't granted authority to change or to even recommend a particular officer's discipline for usage, it is true that they were going to be exhibited here. They weren't, in fact, somewhere in here also, it reminds us that we cannot call that officer before us. Therefore, I think, Carol, your things is not investigated in that sense. But there is a representative of the police here to walk us through that review and to answer the questions related to that video in front of us. So yes, as to the extent of authority, but the review is a review. We're watching it and then saying what we think so that some of it may make it to policy or policy changes so we don't repeat mistakes. So can I say that both of you are right?
No.
I don't see how we do this in a meeting in the open if these things aren't discussed. And you know, we don't have to vote necessarily, you know, voting that whether the officer's actions were, you know, within policy or not. But that doesn't mean the police don't get to show up when we call them to be heard on this, on a review of this, especially when there's new evidence that's been provided that is not necessarily corroborative of what the police reports are. In my reading of the police reports and compared to what the video shows, I think there are some discrepancies there. So, you know, this board is allowed to review these things. And while our recommendations may be to the aggregate policy, that doesn't mean we're not allowed to discuss what we have seen in these within the evidence. And, you know, I think if this is an attempt to not do that in front of the public in this board, then that is against the spirit of this ordinance.
The fact that
So why, I guess, Carol, let me ask one more question.
Sure.
Why did the member of the police department think it was okay to not appear when we put this on the agenda?
I don't know. I was told that somebody was not available. That's all I can tell you.
Because we've requested this a month ago, which is
I understand that.
So I mean, that is really you know, without explanation that we're now being told that someone wasn't available. I find that is, you know, to be disingenuous at best. You know, every other time we've had this up, we've had somebody here. So I don't see, I find that reasoning to be, you know, again, disingenuous. So, you know, if the attempt here is to not have this discussed, you know, I would strongly object to that. So, you know,
It's not an attempt to not have it be discussed.
okay.
I'm more than happy to ensure. I was not involved in the scheduling, and I don't frankly know how there was a disconnect, but there was. I think if your goal is to discuss the policy implications and so on, I think that's perfectly fair game. What I don't think is fair game is taking another vote like you took in April. That's clearly outside of your authority. And I will ensure that at the next meeting, if you want to take this up again in the bounds of your authority, I will make sure that there is someone from the police department in attendance.
So
Yeah.
what you're saying is that the previous vote that was taken I believe you said it was April. So what you're saying is that vote was outside of the bounds of the CRB to begin with? Am I understanding that right?
Yes, the vote that was taken was that the taser usage was not appropriate per police department policy, and that's clearly not within the authority as we read from 1943, which is limitations on CPRB's review of taser displays, because that was taking an individual officer and deciding whether or not they had deployed the taser or displayed the taser within policy. That is clearly not authorized by 1943.
And sorry if this question has been asked. So was CPRB informed in these 5 months? Because if we took the vote back in April and we've had a meeting every month since then, is today the first day that we were informed that back in April, your vote didn't count? Like, were we told in May? I was looking over my notes. I don't think we were told in May. So then we weren't told in June, and then we weren't told in July, and then we weren't told in August. And now at the end of September, now you're saying, oh, by the way, 5 whole months ago, when you guys made that vote, you shouldn't have made the vote.
It was my response. It was my responsibility at the time. I should have called it out at the time. I'm not as familiar with the taser part of your ordinance as I should have been, and I should have thrown a flag on it when you took the vote in the first place, and I did not.
Well, I mean, looking at the taser reviews that we've reviewed for this entire year, and that's been the only one that's been pending, really. We can wait for the officer, if they'd be kind enough to show up at the next meeting to discuss what happened here. And then I think we can go ahead and vote on what we think the policy changes should be based on what we're seeing here.
That would be perfectly legitimate.
Okay, so what I'm hearing, just because we have so many other things, what I'm hearing is that we will do a review of the taser, because now we have all the information in one place. At the next meeting, there will be there will be representation by the police at that. No, it used to be that Rich walked us through the information of the review. And then at the end, however limited, with full understanding that the case itself and the officer itself is not, we're not to address that. The policy, it says on 45 policy.
It's under 46 that we can make policy recommendations.
Yeah, policy recommendations, but I think it's even, on 46, review, here it is, on C. If the CPRB makes a recommendation concerning changes in policies, procedures, protocols, or practices, as the case may be, in taser displays by the police department, it shall provide reasons for each such recommendation. And, the exhibits will speak at least to some of that. So policies, procedures, protocols, and practices is where we, as a CPRB, can act. So next time we will have a review. We will have, so I urge every member of the board to do your own private viewing, so that as we do it in public, it can go through and you have your questions prepared. And so we can go right through that review of the taser as outlined by the ordinance.
And the policy is 304 for anyone who doesn't have that. That's the taser policy of the Urbana Police Department, which is available on the city website.
Okay.
Hey, Carol, is that Sergeant or Lieutenant Coker? Isn't he our designated?
Yeah, and that's part of the reason why we had the slippage is because between Rich and Corey, we hadn't quite landed on who was actually on tap. So, but I expect that it will be Corey Coker at the next meeting.
Okay.
If he's available.
And if he's not, someone else will fill in.
I'll make sure someone will fill in.
Okay.
Is it possible that, since we're asking for this a month in advance, if Lieutenant Coker is not available, or Sergeant, sorry if I'm using the wrong act, if we could know as soon as possible that somebody else is coming and not him?
Yeah, I'll do my best to let you know. Mm-hmm.
Okay.
All right. So if it's okay with everyone, I'm going to move on. This is obviously an item that's been pending with us, but now we have an agreement of what's to happen for full consideration. Okay.
If possible, I could add just one more small thing.
Please.
It seems like going off what Tony said, 19-44 says that the police department shall investigate. Further down, it says they will provide the report to us along with such information as the police department deems necessary and appropriate for understanding the reason or need for the taser display, the HRO. It seems to me, maybe in this case, that didn't quite happen. I think we got footage, but it wasn't quite enough. So it seems like we didn't follow this policy in that it says they need to, the police need to provide that understanding about why the taser was needed in that case. It seems like maybe we just weren't quite given what was necessary. So I'm not sure where what our authority is, and maybe it's limited, but it seems like policy wasn't followed there. And so maybe that's what we're discussing.
The issue is whether or not we can vote up or down as to whether an individual incident was within the policy of Urbana Police Department. So we're removed in what we normally do in an appeal that doesn't involve a taser. We can't do the same thing. We can make we can give a recommendation as to policy changes per incidents that we see. I don't think there's anything wrong with us doing that.
Okay.
And actually, yes, Colin, there was some material missing, and I think that's we've been working hard to get and make sure that we have everything in the portal for both preview, but also for a full accounting of everything. And at the time, some of this material was not in the portal for our viewing, and now it is. And in fact, we have insisted that is the practice, and that when we go to the portal to do a review or an appeal hearing, all the material that is relevant is in the portal. And I think that'll come back in a little bit, but we've spelled it out. Okay.